Joining me now is writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue. Esther, Harry and Meghan have been in Colombia this week. Apparently, they were invited off the back of their Netflix series. But the topic of colonialism came up, as did the suggestion that Harry should apologise for the slave trade. Amongst other things, doesn't this just highlight the difficulty with non-royal royal tours?
Well, yes, and unfortunately, anyone with an ounce of common sense could have seen this coming from a mile away. We remember when David Cameron went to Jamaica, I believe it was sometime in 2010, and was sort of ambushed by the then Jamaican Prime Minister, who asked for an apology and for reparations, and he expertly sort of diffused that situation because obviously he is a politician and he's trained to in some form of crisis management. And in the same way, King Charles has many times in his role as Prince of Wales been asked to either apologize for slavery and for the sins of the British Empire or pay reparations. We've seen similar calls with the Prince and Princess of Wales when they did their Caribbean tour a few years ago. So this is something that anyone who knows anything about royal tours knows that it's a likelihood or a risk that many working royals could face. Now, unfortunately, Prince Harry and Meghan have sort of found themselves in a situation where they're being used as pawns, basically. You mentioned earlier that this tour of Colombia that they've been doing, it seems a bit rudderless and seems a bit pointless. And the reality is, it is. The vice president of Colombia invited them, she says, over a year ago after watching them on a Netflix series. And you have many Colombians asking, what is the point? We're spending not an inconsequential amount of money hosting these two, not to any actual benefit to the country. This isn't an actual royal tour. There's no diplomatic benefit. It's kind of just, she's seeing a shiny tour in TV and having the resources to get it. And unfortunately, Harry and Meghan being none the wiser, they've gone in sort of under the auspices of talking to veterans and talking to people that have Colombian athletes that have competed in the Invictus Games and going to children's charities and talking about online safety and all of that. But we're really not talking about that because the reality is the vice president knew what she was doing. She's using this couple as a distraction from her own sort of domestic politics woes. And it's becoming clearer and clearer. And you can see the lack of sort of self-awareness on Harry and Meghan's parts because they're just smiling and doing what they think they do best. But without the cover of the royal family, without an actual plan, without a purpose to this visit, they've now been roped into a situation which is quite uncomfortable. You had Prince Harry a few years ago talking about the fact that the Commonwealth, for example, is Empire 2.0, and having these kind of quite scathing criticisms of the royal family. But unfortunately, he's one of the main beneficiaries of the royal family and its entire history. For some reason, even though he called the Commonwealth the Commonwealth Empire 2.0 and has had some significant criticisms of the institution, he insisted on giving his children their royal titles. Why would he do that if he feels so strongly about the institution? He seemed to take in a very kind of unique stance that absolves him of any sort of responsibility, but also makes him feel like he's some sort of do-gooder and that he's actually changing the world in some way or another. And unfortunately, his wife is just happy to be along for the ride. So for many of us, just looking out from the outside, and it's very clear that they're just being used in this tour. And if they're going to make this kind of their MO moving forward, just visiting countries around the world where they've been invited and are none the wiser to the political implications of it, then they're not going to be doing themselves any favors. And unfortunately, we're seeing that kind of unfold now. No one is actually talking about what they went there to do. They're just talking about what they represent and how easy it is to inject them into a conversation that I'm sure is completely out of their own depth.
And much like the interview that they did the other week, they're in Colombia speaking about online misinformation. And while doing that, Harry took a swipe at Elon Musk. What did he have to say? And is there anything in this?
Yeah, so he said that I suspect it was referencing the Southport protest that we've been seeing in the UK over the last couple of weeks. He said that whatever is said online is reflected in the streets. Again, this is another thing that clearly shows Prince Harry is out of his depth. And when you live in an echo chamber, it's really easy to make these sorts of mistakes and really not see the kind of wider implications. He clearly has very little knowledge of previous riots in the UK that were started under similar sort of circumstances, and because of the underlying social tensions and the lack of social cohesion. So if we cast our mind back to the 2005 Birmingham riots, those were started based off a rumor, an unsubstantiated rumor that a Black Caribbean girl was gang raped by British men of South Asian heritage, Pakistani heritage, to be more precise. And those rumors were enough to spark 2 days of riots and were linked to the deaths of two men and caused substantial property damage. And in the wake of that, no one was talking about social media or anything like that, because this was in the era before social media. But the conversation around social cohesion came back into the forefront. In the same way, the 2011 London riots, it was sparked by the death of a black man, local black man in North London, by a police officer, which was later established to be lawful. But this alone caused 5 days of riots, over £200 million worth of property damage. You had the police chief at the time, who was of Nigerian heritage, being called all sorts of racial slurs, was called a murderer, and all of that. And these are the kinds of things that happen when there's underlying social issues, and so that lack of social cohesion. But of course, Prince Harry, who doesn't live in deprived communities in the UK, who has no idea how people in those communities live, who has no understanding of social integration and social cohesion and lack of trust in the police and all these other things, will say, yes, it's because of misinformation online. You know, the riots that started across the UK were actually quite largely spontaneous, and they were sparked by the tragic death of those three girls at a Taylor Swift dance class. Yes, there was misinformation that the individual, or the alleged perpetrator, was someone who came across illegally on a small boat. But the reality is, people were quite rightly incensed that three young girls in their communities were dying as a result of knife crime. He has no understanding of the social issues that are racking the UK, and yet he feels the need to parade around the world talking about misinformation and protecting our children without actually any self-awareness and understanding that he and his children are probably the most privileged people on the planet, and that a lot of the things that he comments on are really out of his depth.
And I've just got a bit over a minute left. The Democrats, they start their national convention tomorrow. Apparently it's been suggested that Meghan not attend as her selling power, and to quote, is considered to be at rock bottom. Well, look, we know she's interested in politics. What's your view on this?
Well, I don't think her selling power is at rock bottom. I think her selling power is non-existent. The reality is, you know, the Democrats are not new to having celebrity endorsements, and they tend to be the more Hollywood-friendly of the two parties. But even then, Meghan really hasn't very little to offer. We know her sort of slight foray into the world of politics wasn't received very well. She tried to lobby Congress over a bill for child safety, but online. But that's about the extent to which sort of her political interests have actually been reciprocated well. The reality is, there's very little value there. She's just a very privileged woman that married an extremely privileged man that seem to talk about things that they really have no intricate understanding of. And so it might actually end up harming Kamala Harris to be surrounded by these privileged, wealthy celebrities who don't live the lives of average Americans to any degree whatsoever.
And just one last thing, I've still got a little bit of time left. Now, we've spoken several times about the Sussexes' revolving door of staff and bullying allegations. They won't go away. I've got about 30 seconds. What's the latest?
So their latest sort of chief of staff that they hired, who was this sort of PR man extraordinaire, has left their company after 3 months. Now, the couple have said that it was a trial period and that they mutually decided to part ways because it wasn't, they weren't a good fit for each other. But this is one of many staff members that have left the Archibald Foundation since its inception. And it's indicating that there's trouble there, that the couple really have no experience of managing anyone, of managing businesses, of really understanding how to put together a team and make it work. And it indicates that the couple are quite rudderless and really not very experienced in doing anything outside of sort of being royal smiley faces. And they're seeing those challenges come to light outside of the royal family more than ever.
Thank you very much. Esther Krakue, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your insights.